What is up, ladies and gentlemen, beautiful people from all over the world, most likely just Sonoma County. Um, Welcome to the stream. Tonight is very exciting. We are going to learn about ancient Athenian democracy, the first democracy that we know of in recorded history, as well as the Athenians' attempt to defend that. Oh man. Okay, so here we are, right in the middle. These graphics look worse to you? Maybe a little bit. Um, so, where are we right now? We are in, should be Athens. Yes. We're going to make our way down to Democracy in Athens. We're going to take a walk. And then we're going to take a horse ride up to here. We're going to check out the Battle of Marathon, the plain of it, the plain of Marathon, where the Persians invaded. And then we are going to switch games, actually. And we are going to head to Rome Total War, where we will play a full hoplite battle. These people are quite loud. Let me just turn this down. Let me make sure I know where I'm going. Okay, we are going south. And we're going to run through the Agora as we go. Here's the Stoa Aquila, it looks like. Going up the Agora, and here is... So when we saw these guys in Sparta, they were Helots. I imagine that's their generic representation of slaves. And Athens had a lot of slaves. Let's not forget, some of them were very important, well-regarded and well-respected. They could be teachers, they could be artisans, they could make a lot of money, even as slaves. However, many slaves were terribly treated. And when we look next week at the mines of Laurium, the silver mines that gave Athens a lot of her wealth and a lot of her power, those were exclusively mined by ancient Athenian slaves. Am I a historian? I got a master's in history, so I've done some historian work. I teach history at the high school level, and I've been, over the past few years, teaching a gamified simulation course on ancient Greece. So this is in addition to that. Instead of doing all the readings that I want my students to do, I've given them the option of watching me play Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour and learning from me this way. All right, let's talk to Aspasia. Aspasia is the girlfriend of Pericles, one of the men who ascended to the highest ranks of the Athenian democracy in the middle of the 5th century BC. What's up, Aspasia? Let's chat.
Welcome, wanderer, to the democratic center of Athens, otherwise known as the Pnyx.
Ooh. Let's begin this tour.
The Pnyx was the meeting place of the Athenian Assembly and the physical embodiment of democracy at work. This tour will give you insight into how citizens made decisions and kept the city running. We can talk more when you have finished the tour. See you soon, wanderer.
The Athenian Assembly was known as the Ecclesia. It met at the Pnyx 40 times a year to discuss various civic matters, and each session usually lasted a few hours. The word Pnyx is believed to mean something close to packed together. This was probably a reference to the fact that during meetings of the Ecclesia, the location would be filled to its capacity, with citizens packed in practically shoulder to shoulder. All male citizens were allowed to directly participate in the democratic process. Those over 20 years old had the right to speak and vote, while those over 30 could be elected to the higher position of magistrate. In total, there were approximately 30,000 citizens in Athens in the classical period. To draft and adopt decrees, 6,000 of them had to attend the meeting.
Yeah, so what we mean by democracy, I love this interpretation of it. So we call this a democracy, true, pure democracy. Every citizen gets to vote, and this is on whether to go to war, which makes sense because everyone voting is a citizen being an adult male, those are the people going to be fighting. They're going to be on the front line. So the people voting are literally the ones going to be spilling their blood. But all citizens got to vote on everything else: trade policies, foreign policy, affairs of state, the institutions of Athens. So what we think of as the preserve of our federal and local governments was the preserve of every single citizen who got to vote. And as you saw, there's 30,000 citizens. Only 6,000 of them were required for a quorum, because many of them are going to be off in the countryside farming or otherwise doing their important work in their daily life. This is the educational mode. This is the discovery tour. No, there's unfortunately no combat here, but there is a lot of learning. So if you stick around, you'll get some of that. The magistrates they're talking about are the Archons. There are 10 of them. I'm not going to say too much more about them because I imagine we're going to get some more about them. Not every ancient Greek city was a democracy. In fact, most cities in the classical period functioned under two other forms of government: oligarchy or tyranny. And that's one of the reasons I love teaching ancient Greece, is that in a very small preserve from Greece to the coast of Asia, in this small area of the Aegean, you have this wide constellation and diversity of polis, with democracies, oligarchies, aristocracies, tyrannies, which are essentially dictatorships. You have a few monarchies. You have a giant empire of Persia. How do they tally the vote? Typically by acclamation. So stamping their feet, gnashing their terrible teeth, etc. The louder side won. Occasionally they would make people sit apart if it was particularly difficult. And so you'd have, one side move to one side of, the supporters of one side moving to one side of the Pnyx, and the others moving to the other side. One of my favorite stories, and I may be misinterpreting this, but I'm going to choose to believe I'm not, which was there's a vote between Themistocles and Aristides, which is going to become important next week during the Second Persian invasion, where they were deciding what to do with this huge new influx of silver they were getting from the mine. And because it's a democracy, the obvious choice of what to do with all the silver is give it to everyone. UBI in 483 BC. Sounds amazing. And Themistocles stood up and said, no, the Persians are going to invade us once again. We need to spend this money to prepare against that invasion. We need to build a fleet. And the vote between these two sides was so fierce that they couldn't resolve it until they held an ostracism. We learned about an ostracism on Tuesday, where people write on broken shards of pottery the name of the citizen they want to ostracize or banish for 10 years. And so between Themistocles, the head of one side, and Aristides, the head of the other, everyone voted. They cast their vote for who's going to get exiled, and it ended up being Aristides, who was just narrowly exiled for 10 years. He was ostracized. And that was how they determined such a tight vote, because they didn't have an institution to literally tally every single vote, except for the ostracism, where they would count up each ostracon. Oligarchies were ruled by a small group of people. One example of an oligarchy is Sparta, where a council of 28 elders controlled the majority of the political process. So that's called the Gerousia, and then they were joined by their two kings for the full cohort. They also had a citizens' assembly as well. Tyranny, meanwhile, involved the ruling of a popular leader known as a tyrant. Tyrants would often seize control of cities in the face of external threats. So frequently what we see with tyrants is there are oligarchies ruling, which is frequently how Greek city-states were ruled. How they were ruled coming out of the Dark Ages. The small group of wealthy people came together and ruled the entire polis by themselves. They would fight amongst each other. It was kind of like unrestricted gang warfare between the elite families. And once this became untenable and really started bogging down the process within a polis, a tyrant would rise up, and he was typically a member of the ruling class who was spurned or aggrieved in some way, and he would gain the support of the population, of the common people, and overthrow the oligarchy, throw out many of them, and rule as a popular despot. You will see this figure over and over and over again, right? Julius Caesar, aggrieved member of the elite, who then gains popularity amongst the poor and uses their energy to rise to power overthrows a system of corrupt aristocrats and installs himself as dictator for life. Donald Trump even fits this mold, right? A grieved member of the elite ruling class who doesn't fit in, right? He goes to those people who feel shunned by the other ruling aristocrats or oligarchs or the ruling class, uses their support to springboard himself to the upper end of the political spectrum. Athens has experienced all three of these forms of government. Until 546 BC, it was an oligarchy controlled by a few important families competing for political power. In 546 BC, the aristocrat Pisistratus seized complete power in the city with the help of a private army, and his family ruled as tyrants until their expulsion from Athens in 510 BC. Democracy was established shortly afterward in order to avoid strife between aristocrats and prevent the rise of another tyrant. So Pisistratus was kicked out with the help of the Spartans, and then the Spartans wanted to install an oligarchy. The Spartans were installing oligarchies all around Greece, and the reason they did this is it's easy to control a small group of aristocrats who know that they have Spartan backing, right? If any of those oligarchs turns on the Spartans will go in, kick him out, and then they'll install a new elite family. So it's easy for the Spartans to kind of put the elites against each other and then use their outside influence and the power of their army to ensure the loyalty of the oligarchic faction over the city. So they were going to install an oligarchy, and they used a guy named Isocrates to do this. Cleisthenes, who's a member of an exiled elite family, who my students know, they're called the Alcmenids. Cleisthenes said he kind of used the same trick as the tyrant. Let's get the energy of the population to throw off the old form of political rule, except he needed to get them on board, and he didn't want to install himself as tyrant, right? And I think that his family was suspect enough that the people would not have gone for that. So instead, he offered them isonomia, or equality under the laws. This then becomes demokratia, right? Democracy. And so Cleisthenes offers them this option. Hey, we're gonna put you in charge. You need to kick out Spartans and their supported oligarchs. And if you do this, you will be able to rule and establish your own government. So this is a Greek marble throne, known as the Elgin throne, with the depiction of the Tyrannosaurids Harmodius and Aristogeiton. So I guess those are those two people. So Cleisthenes was in Athens, not typically seen as the founder of the democracy. In fact, they usually venerated or honored these two people, Harmodius and Aristogeiton, two lovers who ended up killing the tyrants, or killing one of the two tyrants. Pisistratus, the tyrant, had two sons who took over from him after he died. Hippias and Hipparchus were the two sons. Hipparchus went after Harmodius, I believe. He was like, "You're super beautiful, I want to bang you." And Harmodius and Aristogeiton, who were lovers, were like, "This guy sucks, we're going to kill him." They ended up killing Hipparchus during a big festival, and that led to a huge clampdown, a lockdown by the surviving brother Hippias, who then knifed, who tortured Harmodius and Aristogeiton, and they both died, but then ran a reign of terror over the city until Sparta showed up to kick him out, and then the events that I just described unfolded, leading to the foundation of democracy.
Citizens came from all over Attica's 10 districts to attend the meetings of the Ecclesia. The meeting was presided over by an executive council called the Prytanes. Every session began with a sacrifice to Zeus Agoreos, the patron of the assembly. During the meeting, citizens delivered speeches from the Pnyx's platform on whatever issues the city faced. Afterwards, the issue was voted on with a show of hands from the gathered assembly. The Ecclesia made important decisions about subjects like grain importation, expenses, and declarations of war. While they could not directly enact laws, they had a say in appointing Athens' legislators, which gave them a large role in shaping the city's daily operations.
All right. So they just said they contradict me. With, it is a great dinner conversation. They contradict me, which happens all the time, right? I am unfortunately not all-knowing as much as I like to tell my students that, and so they say that they voted by hand. I want to stay with the acclamation thing, the volume, because imagine trying to count 6,000 hands. I think that'd be really difficult, especially if they are spread throughout the Pnyx. And I do wonder, are we on the Pnyx right now? I always imagined it as more of a, kind of like a Greek theater type with, a ton of seating. And right here, I'm not seeing seating enough for 3,000 people. So hopefully we'll get a picture of what that looks like in a little bit. In Aristophanes' comedy Assembly Women, the playwright imagines a scenario in which the women of Athens seize control of the city's government and enact two major reforms: the abolition of private property and enforced sexual equality for old and unattractive women. Aristophanes' play treats the idea of women in the assembly as a joke, which is not surprising given that women were not allowed to be part of the assembly. However, women still played a public role in Athens in the form of religious rituals. Women were priestesses in over 40 major public cults, including the cult of Athena Polias, the Athenian patron deity. Some festivals, such as the Thesmophoria, which was held in honor of Demeter, were also reserved exclusively for women. And this is the Bema, a platform for speeches on the Pnyx. So, here's a clepsydra. I have no idea what this is. In the 5th century BCE, all citizens could theoretically attend the Athenian Assembly, which governed not only civic affairs but also the affairs of an entire empire. Needless to say, managing the assembly was complex, and one of the main challenges was ensuring the meetings were conducted in a timely fashion. It was especially important that every citizen was given the same amount of time to speak. For this reason, a water clock known as a clepsydra was set up at the Pnyx to ensure every orator spoke for the same allotted time. A clepsydra was made of two large vases, one above the other, and a small tube. The tube poured water into the bottom vase over the course of 6 minutes. Then the vases were switched and the process repeated itself. In addition to keeping time at assembly meetings, clepsydrae were also important in courts of law, where they ensured both the prosecution and defense had equal time to speak. Awesome. So, one of my favorite things to ask students is, what do you think life was like before the clock, right? There is a clock everywhere. It's in your pocket. It's on almost every wall in almost every room in your house. Not on every wall, but in almost every room in your house, there is a clock. We are so constantly aware of what time it is. And for so long, there was morning, noon, afternoon, dark. That's it. And so beyond that, you had to be really flexible with your timing. And so that's one way the Athenians could ensure equality of time and minute time differentials.
While some citizens only participated in the sessions of the Ecclesia, others could become more involved in democracy as magistrates. Magistrates were elected from among Athenian citizens over 30. They were often successful orators and charismatic politicians, and they held much more sway over important decisions than the average citizen. One of the most famous magistrates was Pericles, who was so popular he held his position for 15 years.
So these magistrates were called Archons. There were 10 of them, one from each tribe. One of the things that Cleisthenes did, and again, I think that they're probably going to get into this later on, but Cleisthenes divided up all of Attica, which is the region that Athens is in, and he carved it into different demes. And each deme was then put into a trites. Trites means 3, right? And so you've got the hill demes, you've got the coast demes, and you've got the plains demes. And so each trites would have one hill, one coast, and one plain deme smushed together, so that you had a relative balance between these areas. And then each of those trites then had their own festivals, their own heroes. Certain cults were specific to them. So there were ways to pull these demes together so that Athenian citizens were forced to interact with people from outside of their local region, or their local area that they're going to bump into all the time. So think about in modern America, we have a society that is riven between urban and coastal people. Sorry, urban and rural people. And that is the same thing that Cleisthenes was dealing with in Athenian Democracy. And so that was his way of getting around this divide between geographic areas and where people live. In theory, the Athenian democracy was supposed to give laborers as much power as aristocrats, but in practice, the influence of the nobility remained strong. This is mostly because aristocrats had more resources available to them when it came to forging political alliances and maintaining their prestige. Does this sound familiar to any 21st century societies? I can't imagine. As a result, many elected officials from the 5th century BC belonged to the aristocracy. For example, even though the statesman Pericles championed many reforms that limited the power of aristocrats, he himself belonged to the Alcmenionidae, a powerful family that claimed to be descended from the Homeric hero Nestor. And so this is the family I was talking about earlier. Cleisthenes comes from them, and they will show up all throughout Athenian history, up until really the death of Pericles and his nephew, whose name is Alcibiades. After the death of Pericles in 429 BC, a new breed of leaders emerged who did not belong to old nobility. Instead, they were wealthy merchants who earned their fortunes from trade or small factories rather than from land. And they didn't trace their descent back to like Heracles or Poseidon or a mythical king of Athens, right? These are new people. Their opponents called these new leaders demagogues, meaning leaders of the common people. One of the earliest and most well-known demagogues was Cleon, who gained popularity by advocating for policies that benefited the general population, such as paying people for jury duty. He was also famous for taking a very aggressive stance against Sparta during the Peloponnesian War, and for attempting to remove his opponents from office by accusing them of false charges. And as we're going to see in class, Cleon is one of the main forces within Athens that drove them into the disastrous Peloponnesian War.
In theory, every Athenian citizen over the age of 20 had the right to participate in the assembly. However, some of them lived far from the city, and others could not financially afford to miss a day of work to attend meetings. For these reasons, the city introduced a special allowance called a misthos ecclesiasticos in the 4th century BCE, meant to encourage participation. Originally, it was 2 obols, but the politician Cleon raised it to 3.
2 obols was at the average day's wage, I believe. It might be slightly less. I believe a drachma is an average day's wage. But it was enough so that you didn't feel like you were missing out on the work that you needed to do. And we talked last class about how important, or sorry, last stream, about how important it is to pay your political representatives well, so that the work is seen to be important and that people are willing to go into public work for the public good in addition to or instead of work for private profit, right? And that's one of the problems we have today, is that people would much rather try to make a ton of money in private industry than work in, say, municipal government or do something that, for the public good. In Aristophanes' play, Acarnanians, Athenian citizens were so disinterested in democracy that they deserted the Pnyx to loiter in the agora. To combat this complacency, a group of slaves wandered the city, herding the citizens back to the Pnyx using ropes dyed with red paint. Any citizen who tried to escape was marked with the paint and then fined for refusing to participate in democracy. While the story is an exaggeration, the city did actually close its shops in an attempt to funnel people to the Pnyx on days when the assembly was meeting. This is because in the 5th century, Athens had great difficulty convincing its citizens to attend the assembly. Isn't this interesting? They fight to the death to defend their democracy, for their democracy, and they fight to create a democracy at the beginning. We see the Ionian Greeks rise up against Persia to install democracies instead of tyrannies, and then only a few generations later, 1 or 2 generations later, it's hard to get people to even participate in the democracy. And we see that today in America, where 2022, this is a midterm election. It will be interesting to see what the voting turnout is. Very rarely on these mid-year elections does it rise much above 40%. Indeed, 40% is a good turnout for mid-year elections, and I can't remember the last time it was over 50%. Maybe it was in 2018, but for the past generation, it's been quite low. However, the situation changed in the 4th century BC when citizens started getting paid for attending meetings, which helped compensate for any lost working hours. The Pnyx was also enlarged to include up to 8,500 citizens and was later enlarged to fit around 13,000 citizens. Clearly, money was a better motivator than red rope. So, I do wonder, it does say, and maybe chat, you can help clear this up. It said that the pay was 2 obols. Cleon, who was in the assembly and a leader in the 440s and 430s, and I think in the 420s as well, he raised it to 3 obols. But then it says it's not until the 4th century, in the 300s, that people really started attending or re-attending the assembly.
Athens introduced several innovations that heavily influenced modern society, including theater, architecture, and philosophy. However, their greatest contribution was their democratic government, which introduced the concept of a city ruled by its citizens. The decision to adopt democracy as a government, a choice made in 508 BCE, shaped civilization as we know it and continues to affect us today.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Democracy is founded in Athens in 508 BC. 510, 509 is when they kick out the oligarchs. 510, 509 is the same time that Rome kicks out its kings and becomes a republic. And so at this, basically the exact same time, Rome becomes a republic, which means that people are voting for representatives, and Athens has a democracy. So they're voting for representatives, they're voting for their archons, the magistrates, they're voting for generals, but they're also making a lot of the decisions on their own. And here we have the Tyrannicides. This is the more famous version of them, not that marble statue we saw earlier. These are the people who killed Hipparchus, one of the 2 tyrants of Athens after their father Pisistratus had died. In 1792, American revolutionary Thomas Paine wrote in The Rights of Man that what Athens was in miniature, America will be in magnitude. I do believe he was British, but he did come over to America to ruffle feathers. While modern democracies are much larger and more complex than that of Athens, they both share many qualities. For example, just as Athens' democracy was born out of a reaction to the tyranny of Pisistratus and his sons, most influential Western democracies were also reactions against perceived tyranny, such as the American colonies revolting against the British, or the French revolutionaries fighting against the old regime. But perhaps the most enduring part of Athens' democracy is the idea that political power rests with the people. This central concept was preserved by Greek philosophers and historians under Roman rule, passed on to medieval scholars, and championed by modern political activists who laid the foundations for our current systems of government. What I think is really interesting is it's only relatively recently that Athens has become a positive role model. And for much of history, because in the intervening 2 centuries, much of history was run by aristocrats and kings, a lot of people looked to Sparta. Sparta was the better version. They had a stable government. This government lasted for hundreds of years unchanged. They were powerful, etc. Whereas Athens fizzles out pretty quickly. Within about 100 years of the foundation of democracy, they have both ascended to the very top of the ancient world and then crashed and burned really hard. And so a lot of people were like, yo, democracy is really freaky. And it's only in the past 100 years or so, past 300 years I should say, that Athens has been reimagined as a light of inspiration, at least politically speaking.
Hello again, Wanderer. I trust you appreciated learning about the inner workings of the city. Is there anything else you'd like to do?
We would like to take a test.
Then let's start with a simple question. Approximately how many citizens were in Athens in my time?
Okay, so this is important. It's citizens, not people, not inhabitants. So we learned it's 30,000. This is adult males over the age of 20. At 30, you could become a magistrate. but then you have to expand this to include women, children, medics, who are, every time I see them defined as resident aliens, so people who are not Athenian citizens, oftentimes from other places, although they might have been born in Athens just to parents who are not Athenian citizens, and slaves. So it's often hypothesized that at its height, Athens had about 200 to 250,000 people.
Yes, there were approximately 30,000 citizens in Athens, although the population as a whole was much larger. On to the second question. Who of the following was a famous Athenian magistrate?
Leonidas was the king of Sparta. Thank you. Perseus was a heroic. I was gonna say hero. Heroic hero. Well, that's terrible. Perseus killed Medusa, and he was the legendary founder of Argos. So if you remember, I think this was on Monday. Argos was like, "Yo, Persians, we're definitely related. We come from Perseus. Your name is Persia," so it's like we're brothers. Plato is a philosopher, and Pericles is the right answer.
Yes, Pericles was an extremely popular magistrate who managed to keep his position for 15 years. Only one question left.
Oh no! Come on.
What does the word Pnyx mean?
Shoulder to shoulder. Meeting place packed together. Speech platform or place of governing. I think it means packed
Correct.
together.
The Pnyx was usually crowded with
like a
citizens
sneeze.
attending meetings of the Ecclesia. You know enough about democracy to be a politician yourself. Well done,
What do you think,
Wanderer.
chat? Should I be a politician? No, that'd be a disaster.
Very well. Farewell, Wanderer.
Okay, I think at this point, it is time to hop on a horse and ride to Marathon. Actually, you know what? Let's fast travel to the altar of... Let's see, is there anywhere closer? So we're going up to Marathon. And let's fast travel. So, I do apologize. Evan, I think that's a terrible idea. You know as well as I do that I start harping at people a little too much. Okay, so here we are. It looks to be dark. I think we're gonna meditate and come back when it's daytime. Now, I do apologize for those people who are not in my class. This is gonna be, you know what? Let's see. Maybe I can give enough of an overview on the route there. Come on, meditate, please. No. Oh dear. Okay, well, let's see if I know what the control is for meditate so that I can come back and the sun is out. Sun effects. It's kind of annoying. This game doesn't actually give you all of the controls in the keyboard. Here we go. Customize. Meditate. Yeah, it's M. It's hold M. And you know what? It's probably because I'm on this perch. So let's dive into this thing of rose petals. It's like American Beauty. Okay, so here's the deal. And this is one of the pitfalls of Athenian democracy, is there's this big revolution going on in Asia Minor, so the west coast of Turkey, and there are a bunch of Greek city-states there, and they're like, yo, this Persian Empire that's ruling us sucks. It's more complicated than this, but just bear with me. Let's throw them off and let's install a democracy, or democracies. And then they come to Athens and they say, Athens, you are such an inspiration to all of us, truly amazing, we love what you're doing here, can you help us throw off the Persian yoke and become democracies ourselves? And they had gone to, oh, don't read this, class, that's a spoiler. They had, so this guy who's asking Athens for help goes to Sparta first, and he asks the Spartan king for help. And the Spartan king's like, no way, this is absurd. You want me to help you against the biggest empire in the world? You know, like, Greece is tiny. The Persian Empire ruled from Turkey to modern-day Pakistan. And so for Sparta, a city-state like Sparta, to go against the Persian Empire was ridiculous. So he's like, get the hell out of here. The same guy goes to Athens and is addressing the Pnyx full of tens of thousands of people. It's like, says the same thing. Oh, great Athenians, you are an inspiration. Help us, your brothers in the east, to throw off tyranny. And the Athenians, because remember, it's acclamation. And this is going to bite us in the butt a lot. Where, like, the chanting and the screaming, the like, whooping and the shouting gets people really hyped for potentially really stupid things, like, I don't know, attacking the greatest empire the world had ever seen. And so they do it. And so they go over there and they burn down a major city, the capital of the region that now makes up most of Turkey, known as Lydia. The capital is Sardis. They burn it down, and up in flames goes one of these major temples as well. And the emperor of the king of Persia is none too pleased with this, and sends a number of first off, subdues all of the Greek city-states in Ionia. So he takes all that revolution's done, over. And then he sends a boatload of people, a number of people. Actually, he sends a couple boatloads of people, but this is when they actually get here. The first time they go, there's a giant sea storm and they all sink and die. But the second time they come over, they land here at Marathon. And here we have the bay, or in the plains of Marathon. We're going to do a walking tour of this, and then I'm going to switch over to Rome Total War. We're going to play a hoplite battle on the plains of Marathon. But first, let's check in with Herodotus. What up, Dotus?
Welcome, traveler, to the site of the legendary Battle of Marathon.
All right. And you know, it's Herodotus himself. It's very fitting. It's Herodotus himself who writes about the Battle of Marathon. And I'm going to share a speech that he's written at the end of this.
Marathon was the location of one of the greatest battles in Greek history. It was here where Athenians made a stand against the might of an imposing Persian fleet. Your visit will take you through the causes of the conflict, the battle itself, and its far-reaching consequences. I will see you again once you're through. Farewell for now.
So let's see how much context they give. Finally, we've got something on stream that I actually know about. When we talk about pottery and all this archaeological stuff, I'm so lost.
In 490 BCE, 600 Persian triremes landed on a beach 35 kilometers north of Athens. Standing in their way were 11,000 hoplites led by the prestigious Athenian general Miltiades. The Persian forces outnumbered the Greeks approximately 5-1, and yet the smaller force managed to push back their would-be conquerors. The Battle of Marathon was a major turning point in the Greco-Persian Wars, and the Athenians' victory would be celebrated for many years. The modern-day distance-running event is named a marathon in memory of a soldier from the battle who ran back to Athens to announce their victory, though whether this is real or legend is uncertain.
So we'll talk, we're going to talk about Miltiades. It's important to note that up until this point, the Greeks and the Persians had faced off a number of times, right? There was this huge revolt in Ionia. All of the cities that had revolted were subdued and destroyed. We're talking men executed, women enslaved, young men or boys castrated, cities leveled. Total extirpation and destruction. This was a horrifying event, and the numbers are contested. Ooh, actually, let's take a look at this trireme as it's sailing. The numbers are contested, but the Persians outnumbered the Greeks at least 2 or 2.5 to 1, and maybe more than that. I hope we can catch this trireme. Since we're not getting any Persian triremes, it's going to go too fast. So Persian triremes, or general triremes in the ancient world, they had 3 rows of oars. and they could travel, I think, up to 120 miles a day. They were incredibly fast. The Persian army had many bow-wielding horsemen. Because of this, its forces were very mobile and especially effective on the dry and rocky terrain of the Middle East. However, Persian cavalry was much less comfortable in mountainous regions and wooded areas, and that is going to cause a number of problems for them over the course of their invasions in Greece. And one of the reasons that the Battle of Marathon happens where and when it did is due to Persian cavalry. One of the reasons that the Greeks had fared so poorly in Asia Minor, as I mentioned, the Athenians, they go to help their friends in Ionia, they burn down Sardis, and then they run away from the city and are caught by the Persian cavalry, outflanked, outmaneuvered, and most of them are killed. Here at Marathon, I'm going to go up once again. You see that around this plain, it's very rocky, hilly, and not great for bringing horses, or especially not hundreds or thousands of horses at a time. They can't maneuver very well. So this was a place Miltiades had said, we need to meet the Persians where they land, because if they come into the hinterland, they're going to have far too much space to move about. But if you look at the map, you have this bowl. This is the plain of Marathon. If they can get past these passes into here, they can run all over Attica. They can get anywhere. So Miltiades consistently says, we need to be aggressive. We need to bring the fight to them. We can't let them off the beach.
The Persians wanted to invade Greece in part due to its rich silver mines. In 545 BCE, they came closer to this goal after their victory over Croesus, the king of Lydia. The victory forced some Greek populations in Asia Minor to surrender and gave the Persians a solid foothold to carry out a large-scale invasion. In 494 BCE, the city of Miletus revolted against its Persian rulers. They were aided by Athens and the nearby city of Eretria, and even burned down an important Persian temple. The Persian king Darius was enraged by their sacrilege, and in 491 BCE, sent messengers to the Greek cities demanding their submission. Athens and Sparta killed the Persian messengers, goading Darius to invade. The Persians began their attacks, first capturing the city of Naxos and enslaving its inhabitants, then taking the city of Eretria. Filled with confidence from their string of victories, the Persians set their sights on Athens.
Yeah, so this is this classic line from 300, earth and water. And Leonidas, it's not actually Leonidas, it's his predecessor, this guy Cleomenes, who's pretty crazy. He's come up in the stream previously, and they give the laconic phrase, earth and water, you'll find a bunch down there. And that's when the the heavy metal guitars come in. Leonidas kicks the guy down the well. It's like, ah, right. Athens at least put the messengers on trial, but both city-states committed a pretty serious sacrilege by killing the messengers. Yeah, this is Sparta exactly. The Persian king Darius, as I always tell my students, Darius is the kid who beat me up and took my lunch money as a kid. Darius is the king of kings. Darius proclaimed that he was chosen by the god Ahura Mazda to be king of kings and master of the world. He did his best to live up to those titles and conquered Egypt, Babylonia, the Lydian section of Asia Minor, as well as several smaller states. This is not actually correct. It's Darius's predecessor, Cyrus, who took over Lydia, Babylon, and Asia, and the Lydia part of Asia Minor, as well as a lot of Asia. Cyrus's son Cambyses conquered Egypt. Now, I guess it's fair to say that many of these places revolted when Darius led a coup and took over the Persian Empire, but those places had already been subsumed into the larger Persian Empire. Darius allowed his subjects a fair amount of autonomy, but also demanded yearly tributes as well as troops in the event of a war. So you know how I said that all those Ionian states rose up in rebellion because they're like, we want democracy? Well, after they were then subjugated, laid low, and brought back into the Persian Empire, the Persians were like, yeah, you can have democracy. That's fine. We don't care. Just pay us tribute. So it's like win-win kind of situation, except by win-win is like you won only after your people were enslaved. Thanks.
The Greeks were surprised by the ferocity of the Persian attacks. Seeking aid against the upcoming invasion, Athens was forced to appeal to other cities for help. In a surprising move, they asked for aid from Sparta, known for having the strongest army in Greece. The Spartans agreed to the request, but they were unable to send reinforcements in time due to the religious feast of Apollo Carneos, which forbade them from leaving their city until the next full moon. The only extra help Athens managed to acquire was from the small Boeotian city of Plataea, which sent an additional 1,000 hoplites. This was the first time in Greek history that their entire civilization was under attack from an external invader. Despite sharing the same language and same religion, Greek city-states had often warred amongst themselves. The Persian invasion was the first time they realized the necessity of collective action to ensure their survival.
Looks like we have our own internecine Greek conflict in the chat. Yeah, so we have unfortunately we've got Asia Minor off screen here. We have Naxos down here, so this is kind of a staging location. The Persians sail right in. The Naxians are not expecting this, and the Persians are like, "What's up? We're burning your city." And then R.I.P. Naxos. They then go over to Euboea. Euboea, Eretria is... I think Eretria is on this side. This is Chalkis or Chalkis. Eretria had sent ships with Athens to burn the Persian city in the first place. And then they go here, they subdue Eretria, they besiege it. The Eretrians don't go out to meet them, they instead wait for a siege. It takes 5 days, then the Persians take it over and do their normal thing, burning, looting, castrating, enslaving, etc. And then they land at Marathon. Oh yes, and this is Apollo Carneus. Plataea was the site of the famous Battle of Plataea. This is the climactic or final battle of the Persian invasions, the second one that we'll get to in the next few weeks. The battle ended in a decisive victory for the Greeks, who managed to successfully repel the invaders. Plataea is like the cutest, most adorable, and important Greek city-state that keeps popping up. It is, I think this is it. Ruins of Plataea. Ooh, yikes. That is a major spoiler right there. But if you can tell, it lies at the crossroads between Boeotia, Attica, and the Isthmus of Corinth, which is one of the reasons it keeps popping up. It's really important despite being a very small city. But they send 1,000 hoplites, probably like 90% of their adult male population, to help Attica in what should have been a suicide mission. So this is it's a really important and meaningful moment for the Plataeans.
The Persian fleet originally planned to land at the port of Phaleron. However, the exiled Athenian tyrant Hippias, who sided with the Persians, advised them to land at Marathon instead, where it would be easier to deploy cavalry. The Athenians were unaware of the Persian battle plans and left Marathon undefended. This allowed the Persians to quietly set up camp on the beach, while Athens scrambled to mount a defense.
Yeah, so Hippias, that guy I mentioned, right? So Hippias and Hipparchus are the sons of Pisistratus. Hipparchus is murdered by the Tyrannicides after getting a little handsy with Hermodius. And then Hippias survives. He gets exiled in that whole kerfuffle that ends in democracy. He comes back to try to reinstall himself as dictator, and as at least what Herodotus says, he earnestly believes that he is the last best hope to save Athens from being completely decimated by the Persian king in a reprisal action. So he's got all sorts of weird dreams going on before this, but he says, "Yo, let's land at Marathon. This is going to be the most advantageous for you." And this is actually the same place that Pisistratus had landed something like 50 years earlier with a mercenary force, and finally was able to take Athens. He had attempted to become the tyrant 3 times. Third time's a charm. Third time was when he landed at Marathon in around 545, somewhere like that. For a while, Phaleron served as Athens' main port. This changed after the general and politician Themistocles encouraged the development of the natural harbors of the Piraeus. Piraeus turned into a bustling port of its own, and Phaleron was gradually abandoned. I don't know why they included that right now, but we're going to talk about Phaleron and the Piraeus, which is the main port of Athens today and one of the biggest ports in Europe to this day. We're going to talk about that next week when Themistocles comes into the scene and readies Athens to defend against a Persian invasion.
The Persians' overwhelming numerical superiority forced the Athenians to get creative with their defensive strategy. The city sent 10,000 hoplites, along with the extra 1,000 Plataean reinforcements, to a hill located above the Persian encampment. Once in position, Athenians had to decide whether to wait for the Persians to attack or to strike them first. Athens' strategists believed the former option was better, but the general Miltiades believed a first strike was more advantageous, as the Persians had their backs to the sea. In the end, Miltiades' opinion prevailed, and the Greeks made their move.
So here we have Miltiades. Before the Battle of Marathon, the general Miltiades was suspected of aspiring to tyranny. He had actually been a tyrant in the Chersonese, so in the choke point between the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea, he had been a tyrant there and helped to ensure a stable grain supply coming to Athens. However, he acted as a tyrant. He was the dictator of this land. He was forced out by the Persians. He came back to Athens, and he had actually fought the Persians, so he was elected as a strategoi, or one of the 10 generals each year, because of his experience fighting Persians. Miltiades took advantage of his newfound popularity to request a large fleet. While he kept the reasons for his request a secret, it was eventually revealed that he was using Athenian military resources to wage a personal war against the city of Paros. Okay, this comes after the Battle of Marathon. This is a little frustrating. So after the Battle of Marathon, and when he wins, then he returns. His siege of Paros was unsuccessful, and the general suffered an injury that later led to gangrene. When he returned to Athens, he was put on trial for his actions, and though he managed to avoid the death penalty, he was charged with an enormous fine. He died shortly thereafter. So, despite his saving Athens at Marathon, he is the main general at Marathon. His decisions are what helped lead to the victory here. Unfortunately, he then had a bad idea that led in failure and eventually the bankruptcy of his entire family.
According to Herodotus, the Greek forces charged at the Persians without archers or cavalry. The Persians were unprepared for what they saw as an act of madness. While they were able to hold the Greeks back at first, they were eventually pushed back to their ships and forced to retreat. The Persians suffered heavy losses during the battle, with approximately 6,400 casualties. The Athenians, on the other hand, only lost 192 soldiers.
So the 6,400 is likely just a multiple of 192. We can be sure of 192 because all of their names are transcribed as heroes. The Marathonamachoi, as they came to be known, are some of the most august people in Athenian history, and they go down. Their deeds go down throughout Athenian history as like that is the greatest generation, right? For us, the people who fought World War II. For the Athenians, it's the people who fought at Marathon. The Spartans that Athens called on for aid did eventually make it to Marathon, but only after the battle was over. According to Herodotus, the Spartans toured the battlefield, praised the Athenians on their victory, and then departed. And here we have a version of Marathon. Cool.
The victory at Marathon was considered miraculous. The Greeks attributed this miracle to the appearance of legendary heroes who they allegedly saw return from the dead to fight at their side in defense of the city. For example, several Athenians swore they saw the mythical king Theseus take up arms at Marathon, a scene which would later be depicted in Athens' Agora. Similarly, some hoplites attested that Heracles appeared at Marathon, clad in his lion's skin and wielding a club. The supposed appearance of these heroes helped elevate the Battle of Marathon to a legendary status among the Greek people.
Yeah, so very similar to how the Trojan War is described by Homer. You know, the idea was that the Athenians were just fighting side by side with legends and heroes. It does. I really wish that instead of flags, they had like full-on rendered people. Right? They have the renders. They have the soldiers. I would love for them to actually put, 25 or 40,000 Persians versus 10 or 11,000 Athenian and Plataean hoplites. I really want to see what this looks like. What does this mass of people look like? The only time that we assemble in those numbers are like sporting events, which I guess we never do that anymore. R.I.P. live public functions. Heracles was renowned for his heroic feats and labors, but his death was surprisingly tragic. According to legend, Heracles' third wife... Okay, you know what? Honestly, I'm skipping this. This has nothing to do with Marathon. Let's keep going.
After the Persians fled Marathon, they tried to invade Athens by way of the Bay of Phaleron. However, this gave the Athenians time to return to their city and mount a proper defense. Fearing further losses, the admiral of the Persian fleet called off their attack, and the Persians returned to their empire.
Culture is important.
Darius was furious at the campaign's failure, and decided to seek vengeance in a retaliatory expedition from both land and sea. Meanwhile, Sparta begrudgingly congratulated Athens on their victory.
And remember, this is like only 10 years after Sparta. Let's see, it's about 15 years after Sparta had tried to overthrow Athenian democracy and install a tyrant. So the fact that they are now working together is pretty remarkable. The Athenians buried the soldiers who died at Marathon in a monumental tumulus. The tumulus featured 10 steles listing the names of the honored dead from each tribe. A second tumulus was built for the Plataeans and slaves who died alongside the Athenians. So there are 10 tribes, and so one stele per tribe. The dead soldiers were granted the right to be worshipped as heroes and even received the honor of a cult. When the general Miltiades died, he was buried next to his men. So typically, after a Greek battle, the sides would say, "Oh, nice job." They do their classic handshake, and then they take their dead back to each side and either bury them or burn the dead. Marathon was one of the only times I know of where the feat was so amazing that the dead were buried on site, and then they erect, cult, essentially what amounts to a cult shrine. And what's cool about this is it shows you a little bit of the continuum of divinity in the ancient world, where it's not human beings, the world, and then like giant omnipotent God that is all powerful, all knowing, and whatever. That we have this like so clear a demarcation that we have in this Judeo-Christian ideology that like you're not ascending that. In the ancient Greek world, you have heroes, Hercules, the gods even are relatively human-like, and here you have heroes whose actions have gotten them to the level where they can be worshipped as a cult. And here we have, this is Darius, I believe, king. He's got a bow, which the Persians will use, but not the Greeks at this time were not really into archery. And then we have a trireme here, and you see the beak. It looks pretty cool. Actually, tetradrachm of the Persian Empire, depicting the Persian king in prow of galley. Excuse me, Cinder wants out. I'll be right back. What, you don't want to stay around for the stream, Cinder? You're so sad. Okay. As I've mentioned, Cinder really likes modern history. Ancient history kind of gets boring for her. I guess she's heard me talk about it so much.
The victory at Marathon marked the beginning of a new era for Athens. According to Herodotus, Athens' success at pushing back the Persians ranked them first in the ongoing competition between the Greek city-states. The Athenians immortalized their prestige by erecting monuments in both their own city and in Delphi. The Battle of Marathon was also perceived as a blow against tyranny. Tyranny went from being perceived as a simple flaw in authoritarian excess to major treason against the homeland, a sin that rulers would take great pains to avoid being accused of. This helped consolidate the institution of democracy for the next 2 centuries.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that democracy does, especially at moments of crisis like this, is it gives people real buy-in into the political process to the point where they're willing to fight and die, right? If it was the Persians invading to replace the tyrant who was ruling Athens, a lot of them would be like, okay, fine, like that's chill. The Persian Empire was very benevolent and very hands-off. But the Persian Empire is, first off, coming to punish the people of Athens for voting to, burn down Sardis. And on the other hand, the people defending Athens are defending the government the state of Athens, which they themselves are a part of, right? And so we see this both in ancient Athens, we see this in the French Revolution, but giving people a lot of power and civic responsibility means that they will go to fight and fight hard for their state. Oh, I'm so glad to help your world building, Evan. After the Battle of Marathon, the Athenians built a treasury in Delphi to express gratitude to Apollo. The small temple-shaped monument was built with spoils taken from the Persians at Marathon. Tune in the week of February 14th. We're going to see Delphi, and we're going to see a lot of these treasuries, essentially places to dump a bunch of cool money, art, jewels, and other offerings to the god Apollo. The treasuries Metopes depicted the exploits of Heracles and Theseus, the 2 mythical heroes who allegedly helped the Athenians fight the Persians back. They also featured images of Athena and the Amazons. And here we have Herodotus to take another test.
I hope you enjoyed this look into the famous Battle of Marathon. It was not only a major turning point in the history of Athens, but also for all of Greece. Its repercussions would be felt for many years to come. Is there anything else you'd like to do?
I think we are ready.
Of course. Let's start with a simple question. Which Athenian general led the Greek forces at Marathon?
All right, do we have enough chat participation to answer these questions?
Correct.
Very
Miltiades led the forces at Marathon, and it was his strategy that helped the Greeks push the Persians back. Time for another question. Which Greek city revolted against the Persians in 494 BCE?
Ooh, this would almost be difficult if you guys hadn't done this for the last semester.
Correct. Miletus revolted against Persian rule
As if
with
Hesiod
support
wasn't
from
already
both
getting
Athens and Eretria. One more question. Which other Greek city aided Athens at Marathon?
So they do they have a different way of spelling things. They use OS instead of US. US is kind of like the Latinized version of a lot of these Greek words. Very well done. Hestia, 3 for 3.
Yes, Plataea sent 1,000 Hoplites to aid
They
the
also use
Athenian
K's
forces.
instead of C's.
Well done, traveler. You have learned much.
Drachma, please. Yeah, I'll give you 1 drachma for right answer. And remember, 1 drachma is something like 1/100th of a talent. That's all for now.
Farewell, traveler. I hope to see you again soon.
Fine, I'll give you money. Let's see. Okay, is there anything else that I want to check out here? We have a Spartan camp, very interestingly, and then we have that area. We have a couple. Oh, these are the Tumuli. We'll check this out, and then I'm going to drop out of Assassin's Creed. We're going to fight the Battle of Marathon ourselves. So, Hippias, here we go. So Hippias is the Tyrant of Athens, or was the Tyrant of Athens alongside his brother Hipparchus. Hippias was the son of Pisistratus, the Tyrant of Athens. He succeeded his father in 528 BC, ruled with absolute power, and brutally disposed of his enemies. In spite of this, Athens was surprisingly peaceful and prosperous under Hippias' rule. His reign ended in 510 BC when a Spartan invasion of Attica led to his downfall. Hippias fled to Asia Minor, where he came into contact with the Persian king Darius. The disgraced tyrant would eventually convince the Persians to land their forces at Marathon. Here's Achilles and Ajax playing a board game on an Attic black-figured amphora. Okay, I'll definitely give you fake money in class for real money for Latin tutoring. Come on, well, that's good. So I'm glad it's you know, the things that this guy can climb are very unrealistic, especially for what he's wearing. But I am glad that these spiky palisade walls are not climbable. Also, hopefully next week, once school's back fully in session, we can get 50 followers. Because what I hear is that once I have 50 followers, I become an affiliate, and they just announced that affiliates can have their own emotes and icons. So I can start giving all of my students icons in Twitch chat, which would be pretty cool. Big battles. Realizing an enormous battle on the scale of ancient Greek warfare was quite a technical and design challenge. We wanted to remain as true as possible to the tactics and warfare of the time, but plenty of compromises were made for gameplay, excitement, and technical constraints. So I actually haven't even... I mean, I've seen the Assassin's Creed Odyssey combat, that's like one-on-one assassin type. My understanding is they don't have hoplite battles. But once I start playing it, I'll find out if this is true. And honestly, I should figure this out over the weekend. Maybe I'll play a few hours of Odyssey, and see what the combat looks like. Because I do want to give my students a decent understanding and a look at what it looks like for the like real class. I mean, it's brutal scrum. Even making the discovery chore was a challenge, as we needed to show battlefields without explicitly showing a battlefield. We opted for flags instead of violence to communicate the events. This is actually a really cool and interesting piece that shows the sophistication of the Assassin's Creed team, and I respect it even if I don't like it. You know, in most of American culture, like, you can't show a boob because, oh my god, the world would end. Despite all of us being, like, suckered on them as children, and them being a part of anatomy. Like, you know, sex, nudity, etc. No. But violence is totally chill, and in Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour, it's the exact opposite. How many penises have we seen on the screen so far in 2 weeks? It's been a lot of phallus. But violence, the most violent it gets is this guy just shoving his way through crowded city streets. So, I'm down. Hoplites. Alright. In Greece, hoplites were heavy infantrymen. They carried round shields, large enough to protect both themselves and the person to their left, called the hoplon or the aspis, wore helmets, cuirasses, and leggings. Hoplites normally advanced in a phalanx formation of 5 to 7 lines deep. The phalanx allowed them to attack with spears and simultaneously defend themselves from any cavalry and archers attacking on the front. And with that, oh, we're going to see the tumulus. Let's check out this tumulus. The tumulus. I love this word. I don't know of it being used any other time, but here we go. This is the tumulus in the plains of Marathon from the 17 or 1800s. A tumulus was a special a tomb in which the ashes of cremated bodies were collected in purple cloth, purple being the mark of royalty. There's that Tyrian purple, so we saw that guy in Tyrian purple earlier. This is very resplendent, opulent, and rich. The ashy remains were then placed in a bronze urn. There's a large tumulus in the Keramikos that was used from the 560s BC to the end of the 5th century. And so this is where the 192 Athenians were buried. And then there is the smaller tumulus for Plataea, and I don't know where it is. I hope they didn't... If they forgot the Plataeans, I'm going to be really sad. That's discrimination. Plataeans deserve a tumulus too. Okay. With that, I'm going to log out of Assassin's Creed. I have to change my category. Oh, this is going to be exciting. Total War Rome 2. Here we go. And now, let's play some Rome Total War. This is going to be really embarrassing if I lose the Battle of Marathon. I'm going to be really sad. I better not. Greece must remain free. Screw the Persians. I love democracy. So, the ancient Rome class is right. We're going to be using the Greek and there are era appropriate units here. So let's go to custom battle, and I set this up earlier. So we've got Marathon, we got Athens. Oh, we're actually going to do a different loadout. So we're using picked hoplites. These are the best, but it also means that we are going to have very few people. So we've got just this many hoplites. I think in each one there's 160. And then the Seleucids have access to the Persian light archers, Eastern spearmen, the hillmen. These kind of represent, for me, there are Eastern hill tribes with like Persian axes. Persian axemen are talked about by Herodotus. And let's start this battle. Let's see how this goes. I am not proving the yearbook class right. Don't you dare. Oh god, this is terrifying. So, the plains of Marathon, let's take a look. We got our army here, got Miltiades. This actually does a decent job of showing how big it's going to be. The plains of Marathon were about 6 miles by 2 miles, I think it's like 6 miles wide. Imagine that, imagine this whole area being filled with Persian triremes, right? They are going to have landed something like 25 to 40,000 troops.
Hoplites!
All right. Now, if we know anything about
Battle group ready. Awaiting orders. Hoplites ready. Battle group
so,
ready.
at Marathon, you had a much wider line. As we just saw, hoplites fought in ranks of 5 to 8 deep. However, Miltiades decided to stretch out the center portion of the battle line because he wanted to make sure that their line stretched as wide as the Persians did. So, I'm going to zoom in here. How wide are our guys? We want these guys, so this is 4 ranks deep. We're going to get this left flank, we're going to bunch it up a little bit tighter than that. I cannot
Understood.
Streaming this game, which I have loved to play.
Hoplites ready.
Or more to my students. This is like life goals right here. Okay. If only this were done during class time, I was getting paid for it. But let's be real.
General. General.
Okay, so first I'm gonna read a speech because we gotta do it. Turn down game audio. Thank you. Will do. I could have just done master first, shouldn't I? Oh, but we gotta turn the music up. If only this music had the Lord of the Rings option, that I could do like the charge of the Rohirrim. If only. Okay. So, at the beginning, so the Athenians have gone out to meet the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. They've been staring each other down for like 6 days, and at a certain point, the Persians send their cavalry away. And so Miltiades realizes the Persian cavalry is gone. The most dangerous part, the people on horseback that can outflank the Athenian phalanx, attack them from the sides and the back, which is where they are very vulnerable, instead of the front, which is where they're very powerful. So at this moment, Miltiades addresses the crowd, not the crowd, but the 10 Athenian generals, and the decision is split 50-50. Do we attack now, or do we wait? It's very scary to face down and actually attack the Persian Empire and probably lose. Let's be real, they are probably all going to die today, at least as far as they know. They don't realize that hoplite armor is so much more powerful than the lightly armored Asian warriors who have shown up here. So it's split 50-50, and the guy Callimachos, the #1 general, is not sure which way to go. And so this is what Miltiades says to him. Miltiades said to Callimachos, "It is now up to you, Callimachus, whether you will reduce Athens to slavery or ensure its freedom and thus leave to all posterity a memorial for yourself which will exceed even that of Harmodius and Aristogeiton, the tyrannicides. For from the time the Athenians first came into existence up until the present, this is the greatest danger they have ever confronted. If they bow down before the Medes, the Persians, it is clear from our past experience what they will suffer when handed over to Hippias. But if this city prevails, it can become the first among all Greek cities. I shall explain to you how matters really stand, and how the authority to decide this matter has come to rest with you. We 10 generals are evenly divided in our opinions, some urging that we join battle, others that we do not. If we fail to fight now, I expect that intense factional strife will fall upon Athens and shake their resolve so violently that they will Medeize, that they will turn over." So a whole fear during this time is that someone in Athens is going to open the gate in the middle of the night. This is indeed what happens to Eretria, the city on Euboea that has just previously been reduced to slavery and destroyed. But Miltiades continues, "If we join battle before any rot can infect some of the Athenians, then, as long as the gods grant both sides equal treatment, we can prevail in this engagement. All this is now in your hands and depends on you. If you add your vote to my proposal, your ancestral land can be free and your city the first of Greek cities. But if you choose the side of those eager to prevent a battle, you will have the opposite of all good things I have described." Thus Callimachus is swayed, and he decides to join battle. So here we have, we're going to walk out. Now, what's said is that the Athenians went out and ran the entire mile to the opposing lines and crashed into them at full speed. But if you're carrying 70 pounds of heavy hoplite armor, you're not running a mile and then fighting all day, and then running 26.2 miles back to Athens to protect against the Persian cavalry that has gone around the coast. Yeah, I don't think so. So we're going to start this as a casual paced walk. Please let me know if I'm getting attacked. Miltiades himself, allotted overall command for the day, stood where all could hear him, and at length raised his arm, pointed to the Persians, and yelled at them. A shimmering of metal all along the line as the hoplites lowered their helmets, hefted their shields, and shouldered their spears. Here at last was the moment of no return. His head encased now almost entirely within metal, every member of the phalanx found himself frighteningly cut off from the sights and sounds of the battlefield, barely able to see the enemy ahead of him, barely able to hear the braying of the trumpets that instructed the Athenians to start their charge. Only the sudden jolting of his fellows on either side and the surging of the weight of men behind him appeared real. Downward, into the open expanse of the plain, the phalanx began lumbering, keeping its formation not once threatening to break. Okay, so how are we doing here? I'm reading from Persian Fire by Tom Holland. Let's actually pause, reform our line just here, and indeed, I actually may have. Let's see how wide our line needs to be. Thanks for the follow. So what happened during this battle, as we could imagine, is the weak flank or the weak center was not able to push forward, but the sides, which are much deeper, were able to completely encapsulate, and then they choked off on 3 sides of the Persian army, and then they began a massacre. So I think we can do this. I might actually. Yeah, you know what? Let's just go forward. I'm gonna go here, and that's when we're going to begin our charge. All were born on the dread and the intoxication of the moment, for while it was true that the faint-heartedness of a few within a shield wall might prove fatal to the many, then so too was the converse, that even a hoplite shaking with terror as he advanced, wetting himself uncontrollably, streaking his cloak with shit, could know himself strong for being one of his friends and relatives, one with a mighty body of armed and free-born men. How indeed, without the self-consciousness of this, would any Athenian have dared to do what all in the phalanx did that August dawn? To move against a foe widely assumed to be invincible, to cross what many must have dreaded would prove to be a plain of death. All right, I think it's time to charge.
Ready for orders. Hoplites! Up at the double! Your orders? Orders understood. Spearmen at the ready. Advance!
All right, so we're going to try to start this concave early, and I'm going to try to just maintain a solid line here and slowly move up. I imagine these bowmen are going to retreat as soon as I get within range.
Spears ready. Attack their position! We await your command. Break the lines! Engage! Follow me!
Here's the general. I'm going to send my general against him.
Ready!
So here we have the scrum beginning. Nope, don't do that. Don't do that. And now we're going to put ourselves in this hoplite wall mode that gives us additional defense. Now we will begin. This is perfect. So we already have we already have this, and these guys are going to start chewing in through the back. I'm going to charge it. So, unfortunately, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Hey, you, get back there. How anticlimactic. So, I gotta say, I have yet to see a good rendering of a full hoplite battle with as compact and uniform this battle would have been. See, these people should have their shields interlocking, so they've got their spears above them. The men are wavering. Who's wavering? They better not be wavering. Are you kidding me?
Spearmen at the ready.
Bro? Oh, no.
Advance!
That's because they're not attacking anyone. Yikes, this guy got totally decimated. So, that's my bad. Those are my citizens. That's probably a member of a deme that I don't like. Let the hill people die. Oh, here we go. These guys are in a wall. I'm going to send them forward.
Understood. Break the lines! Your orders.
And so,
Orders understood.
these guys are going to move into the center, and they're going to crush down on this area of Persians. These guys really should be much more... I'm just saying. But so while the whole battle is not playing out as well as like the actual Battle of Marathon probably would have, you can start to see how hoplite battles start moving in different ways, right? The one flank breaks, and then people start moving to the other. You slowly start wrapping up. So this middle area broke, forcing all of the eastern infantry into this choke point, this center point, where they are just getting absolutely massacred. However, you can also tell that these hoplites are not mobile at all, right? They can't chase people down, and this is one of the reasons that hoplite battles were typically quite, they were relatively bloodless. Boy, my right flank is in.
Orders understood.
Because once one side broke, that was it. You can't reform a hoplite phalanx.
Yes, Commander. By your command. Hoplites ready. Break the lines.
So they're facing a lot of military infantry, arrow fire. So I'm gonna why does putting them into...
Yours to command. Quick march! Hoplites!
We're gonna get another hoplite charge. Crunch. But then wall. I'm gonna have to stop doing that because it's it makes them turn around and do all sorts of weird things. I'll have to figure out how to command that. There isn't a good map for Thermopylae as far as I know. Uh-oh, these guys are dead. But yeah, so I'm hoping that at the very least we can reenact the Battle of Medea, which is relatively open. How are we doing? Man. So I gotta say, I do wish that this game were better at hoplite and phalanx control because they get stuck on each other really quickly. That said, these shield bearers are about to get absolutely screwed. So this is the enemy general, and he is now stuck between two sides of the Athenian. Okay, how's the rest of my battle going? These lines form up. So yeah, this is totally chaos, as most battles probably would have been. I don't have great options for the archers, and in the actual battle, everyone was stuck up against the beach. And there were so many people. I think I brought like 1,200 hoplites to this fight. But in reality, the 11,000 hoplites that the Athenians and Plataeans brought would have been enough to fully encircle the Persians and sequester them, so that you don't have this annoying skirmisher like running off on the sides. And you'd also have the boats, so that now, rather than running to the hillsides to try to get a better vantage point, the Persians would have retreated back to their boats so that they could survive. Should I continue with the Persian fire description of Marathon, or I can just end the stream? Maybe that'll be the final thing that I do. Close victory. In reality, it was a much more lopsided victory, but that's okay. Right, it was 192 dead. The losses, so they're in the same order of magnitude, and this is about a 3-to-1 or 2.5. So the difference, or sorry, the proportion is about right, but just multiply these by 10, right? So it should have been 11,000 versus about 30,000, and you can see the number of kills are incredible, right? Hundreds of people that each of these killed versus, you know, a few. And these guys really, I think they are the ones who really screwed up my picked hoplites over here. Unfortunate. So, I guess we should have remained on the battlefield. That would have been more interesting. So I'm not going to read over this loading screen. And if you want, pick up Persian Fire. It's a wonderful book. It's one of my favorite descriptions of the Persian Wars. All right, guys, that's going to be it for my stream. Thanks so much for tuning in. There is a suggestion box on my page. Please do give me suggestions. Tell me how you like the Total War thing. I'm hoping to use the campaign aspect of this and do a Thucydides read, so do a little bit of reading. And actually, why don't I show you guys, since I've got you here? How do I load campaign? So this is a game I've been playing. I'm playing as Athens, and this is at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War. So this is just for the TAs who did this last year. But check this out. So I'm playing as Athens. Here we go. We've got the Mines of Glory, and an empire that stretches throughout here. So we've got Olynthios, Potidaea is a city where the Peloponnesian War kind of begins. It's where conflict between Athens and Corinth comes to a head. I took this at the beginning of the game from Corinth, this area. Amphipolis is the site of a major battle. And here, Sestos is where Miltiades was tyrant of. So think about the geopolitics and the grand strategy of Athens. You have the grain coming in from the Black Sea through this is Byzantium, right? through here to Hellespont, the Sea of Marmara, and this Sestos area was ruled over by Miltiades, not necessarily directly under Athenian control, but essentially, he had been sent out, or his ancestor had been sent out by Pisistratus to rule over this area and keep it favorable and allied to Athens. This would make sure that the trade route, which is demarcated by this line here, make sure that the grain would continue flowing. And Athens had leveled up, kind of like how the British did right before the Industrial Revolution. Athens was no longer a city or a population of 90% farmers. Many people had entered the city just to become industrial workers, artisans, people who are making more money than a farmer, but also reliant on imported grain and selling their wares at market. Let's see. So let me just. So here's one fleet who's kind of patrolling the home waters. This is the island of Salamis, the island of Aegina. I really, really, really wish that all of these islands were occupiable. It'd make me so happy. Down here is Cythera, which is south of Sparta. Here I'm expanding a naval empire. I'm going to start a new campaign for this class. I think this is one of the things I'm going to stream. But what I've been doing is I've been raiding this this supply line, so I've completely bottled up Corinth and the Peloponnesian League in here. So I'm making sure that no enemy navy, Corinth being the most powerful naval adversary I have, no navy can leave this area. So I've got this this navy and that navy. This navy is currently raiding their supply line. Up here is Corcyra. Of course, Corcyra is an ally of mine. At the beginning of the war, they're like, yo, we've got the second biggest navy. We should join forces against Corinth.
In a spirit of Olympian hospitality, I welcome you
good.
and...
Okay. And that's, for the most part, it. We've got the Ionian League here. So Persia occupies much of Asia Minor. Anatolia, this is the part of the map that Assassin's Creed does not have. And then aspects of it on over here in the green, Ilion, which is the name for Troy. That probably shouldn't be what it's called. There are definitely more important polis at this point in that area. Mytilene is very important. This is the island of Lesbos. Chios, Rhodes is down. This is Samos, Inui, Kos, Knidos, and Rhodes. And Miletus is here. And Miletus came up a lot in that last stream. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today. Let me know both what you think of this game, and I'd love to talk to the TAs about how you think this could work, as well as how today's stream in Assassin's Creed went. We covered Athenian Democracy, we covered the Battle of Marathon in 2 games, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Importantly, next Monday, MLK Day, we do not have school, so no Greek history, sadness. But today we talked about other freedom fighters, kind of like MLK, so we're going to honor MLK in spirit. Monday night there will be a stream, however, so if you want to get updated on that, please do. I will see you guys all later. Have a wonderful weekend.